Scott Ritter, former U.S. Marine Corps intelligence officer, welcome to TV Rain. To start with, I'd like to ask you a question about the war in Ukraine. I've watched many of your videos and commentaries, and in particular, you've said Ukraine is Russia. I saw this on Twitter, or rather on the social platform X. Do you actually believe this statement, and what is it based on?
First of all, I think you're cherry picking a comment that was made in the context of a larger discussion about the strategic direction that Ukraine should be following in terms of history. And right now, inside Ukraine, there seems to be a struggle between those who are promoting a sort of a pro-European Union approach, meaning that Ukraine should be part of Europe. And so the slogan is Ukraine is Europe. And what I am responding to is the fact that historically, Ukraine is more Russia than Europe. And that when one speaks about the strategic direction Ukraine, in my assessment, should be following if it wants to achieve political, economic stability, that direction goes through Russia. Ukraine has been a part of Russia. Ukraine has been affiliated with Russia during the Soviet Union, and Ukraine has always had very close ties with Russia. And this new embrace of the European Union is, in my opinion, an artificial construct that has been forced upon the Ukrainians by a collective Western power structure that doesn't seek to bring Ukraine in as a friend, but rather use Ukraine as a tool to bring down Russia. So from that perspective, Ukraine is more Russia than it is Europe.
Let me clarify again. This is a quote from X. You wrote it in response to Garry Kasparov, Russian politician. It's not taken out of context. It is a short, full comment, and I've quoted it entirely. But when you talk about Ukraine's future and the direction it should take, I don't hear you mention the choice of the Ukrainian people themselves. You don't deny Ukraine's statehood, do you? If the Ukrainian people want to move towards Europe, why do you think they owe anything to anyone?
Of course, Ukraine is a sovereign state, and if the people of Ukraine legitimately manifest their will to say that Europe is their future, not Russia, then who am I or who is anybody to stand in their way? But I think we know that the history is far more complex than that. We know that the CIA has been working with Ukrainian nationalists to undermine the Soviet Union and later Russia. This has been ongoing since 1946. It's not a matter of debate. You're a journalist. You know this. You know what the CIA has done. You know its relationships with the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists.
Where do we know it from?
Well, the CIA itself has acknowledged this. They have declassified documentation that proves this. We have an entire structure here in the United States, the Ukrainian Congress, the history of which is linked to the Banderas who seized control of the Ukrainian Congress in 1980 through the Liberation Front, again, a front funded by the CIA. This is common knowledge. And it's the documentation of this is available. And the reason why I bring this up is to point out that outside interests, not Ukrainian interests, outside interests have been conspiring for some time now to disassociate Ukraine from Russia. We saw this with the Orange Revolution in 2004, 2005, which unconstitutionally removed Viktor Yanukovych, replaced him with the Ukrainian nationalist government, but was unable to suppress the will of the Russian population or the Russian sympathetic population, which re-elected Viktor Yanukovych in 2010, leading to the 2014 Maidan event. Ukrainians call this a revolution, the revolution of dignity. Other people, such as myself, call it what it is, a CIA-sponsored coup d'etat to remove Viktor Yanukovych, and then using the actual violence to suppress the ability of the Russian people to stand up and say, we don't want to be part of the European Union. So the idea that the Ukrainian people have said collectively, we want to be part of Europe, I think is a misrepresentation of fact. It's much more nuance in that. I would believe in a system
Интересно.
that void of outside interference from either the West or Russia allowed the Ukrainian people to make this decision by themselves. But so far, that scenario hasn't been manifested. The CIA has been heavily invested in pursuing Ukrainian nationalism as a vector to remove Russian influence in Ukraine for decades.
I understand your position. It aligns entirely with what representatives of the Russian state say and radically diverges from what Ukrainian citizens say. These are people who actually go to elections and vote democratically for their leaders. But let's not dive into history. That conversation would take too long, and unfortunately, neither of us have several hours. What I would like to understand is, where does your confidence in Russia's invincibility come from, Mr. Ritter? In a recent interview, you said that Trump's only trump card is to acknowledge America's defeat. I hope I'm not quoting out of context. And you meant defeat in the war in Ukraine. Where does this belief come from that Russia is the most powerful or one of the most powerful global players?
Because it is. I mean, it's a statement of fact, not an assessment. General Cavoli, who's a four-star general, United States Army active duty, has made similar comments about the state of the Russian military, that it's getting stronger, not weaker, that it's able to mobilize manpower quicker than its NATO counterparts, that its defense industry is better positioned to replace battlefield.
I understand. I apologize for interrupting you, Mr. Ritter, but why hasn't the Russian army in 3 years taken the cities it intended to? Kiev, Odessa, Kharkiv, and others, cities that Putin clearly claimed but was unable to seize.
It's curious you keep bringing up the 3-day point. I'm guilty of saying that Russia was going to accomplish.
I never said 3 days.
You literally just said 3 days. How can I explain why?
I said 3 years. In the 3 years since the war began, the Russian army has not been able to take the Ukrainian cities it was aiming for, the ones Putin counted on.
Let me ask you. I know you're the interviewer, but I'll just ask a question. When has Russia, the Russian government, said our goal and objectives are to take Kharkiv, Odessa, and Kiev? Find me one Russian government statement that says that.
Numerous government officials have said this. I can find you a million quotes, honestly, I promise. Even as I was preparing for this interview, I came across several statements by participants in Russian political talk shows who said it outright that they should capture major Ukrainian cities. For example, Dmitry Medvedev, an official, one of the highest ranking, as you know, former president of Russia, formally. He also said that Odessa is a Russian city, and so on. These things are being said constantly.
I think Vladimir Putin has said that that Odessa is a Russian city, and I think many Russians would say historically that's an accurate statement. But talking about the historical roots of Odessa and saying that it's a Russian military objective are two totally different things. The Russians, and you know this, you say you prepared for this interview, so let me tell you what the facts are then. Russia initiated a special military operation on 22 February 2022, or 24 February perhaps, the goals of which were to get Ukraine to the negotiating table. That are the goals of the special military operation, and Russia succeeded. Within 6 days of initiating this military operation, Ukraine began negotiating in the city of Gomel 3 rounds before it transitioned to Turkey. And by the end of March, Russia and Ukraine had agreed to what's known as the Istanbul Communique, which would have brought an end to this conflict. At that point in time, Russia was saying that it was going to withdraw from the territories that had been occupied, because the goals were never to occupy Ukrainian territory, but rather bring an end to the conflict, which Ukraine was unwilling to do through the Minsk Accords. These are statements of fact. Ukraine buckled under pressure by the West, threw out the Istanbul Communique and made the decision to move forward with the conflict, compelling Russia to move into phase 2, then phase 3. And today what we have is Russia engaged in a war of attrition against Ukraine, designed to defeat not just the Ukrainian military, but the collective West. The Ukrainians themselves acknowledge that they are merely a proxy for the collective West, for NATO, for the European Union, for the United States.
Да.
And this is a broader war than the one
Я
that
вас
you speak of.
Господин Ritter, вы часто... Mr. Ritter, you are a frequent guest on Russian state media. Some would say that associating with propaganda harms your reputation. Does it bother you that, for example, Vladimir Solovyov regularly lies on air, spreads disinformation and falsehoods? Does that concern you?
Vladimir Solovyov is his own man, and he's responsible for his own words. I was asked to take part in the show's up. You asked me to take part in your show. Does it bother you that many Russians believe that you're a pro-Navalny outlet that conspires against the legitimacy of the Putin regime? Should I deny and say I won't be on your show because people speak ill of you? You asked me to be here. I'm here because I respect you as a journalist. Other people ask me to appear on programs. As an expert,
Being, let's say, pro-Western doesn't mean lying on air, calling for the destruction of Ukrainian cities, or spreading false information even about me personally. Believe me, I absolutely don't mean to interrupt you, but I'm short on time. I genuinely want to understand your motivation. Take Vladimir Solovyov, for example, or other hosts like Olga Skabeyeva. They spread lies from the first word to the last about people like me, declare us enemies of the state, forced us out of the country we are citizens of. They support and fuel this war. What is your attitude toward that? Why doesn't that bother you? There is a clear difference between what I do and what they do.
You have your position, and I respect it. They have their position, and it's their position. I'm invited on programs as an expert. I am accountable for my words and my words alone. I've been invited on Iranian TV. That doesn't mean that I buy into death to America chanting from the Iranian people. I've been invited to speak on Yemeni TV. That doesn't mean that I support the Yemeni operations in the Red Sea. I've spoken on Israeli TV, Palestinian TV, Hezbollah TV, French TV, German TV, Italian TV. I've spoken on American outlets where the people invite me because they want to know what I have to think. I go on because I feel that my voice, if they've invited me, my voice should contribute to a larger discussion. But I am not to be held accountable for the opinions of anybody who invites me on, whether it be your opinions that some people have been critical of, or, for instance, the opinions of Mr. Solovyov, who you are critical of.
To finish, if I may, and I don't want you to see this as an insult, but I can't avoid asking this question because many people are curious. When you appear on Russian state TV or other shows, do you receive payment for these appearances?
I receive as much money from the Russian government as I receive from you.
I'm not talking about the Russian state per se. I mean, specifically, shows on RT, Solovyov Live, Russia One, and others. Do they pay you for your participation in those broadcasts?
Well, I have to get a better agent because I get no money. I've never asked for money. They've never offered me money, nor would I take money to appear on. I am an independent analyst. And when I'm asked to come on a show and talk about issues such as your show, I was requested to come on here. I do so freely of my own free will, not because of any, economic benefit or compulsion.
Well, thank you very much. I hope to see you again on TV Rain, Mr. Ritter. That was Scott Ritter, former U.S. Marine Corps intelligence officer, on the air of TV Rain.